Minister Mashat, could you share with us how Egypt is promoting the agenda of private investment for sustainable development, specifically with regard to developing a resilient and accessible health sector? So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you OECD for putting this very timely and important roundtable. Of course, investment in healthcare, in the healthcare sector, is something that is on all governments' minds and all citizens as well. And just to follow up on some of the statistics you started with, healthcare spending currently accounts for around 10% of global GDP, and that was just before COVID. The industry is expected to grow annually by around 5%, so that the global market value is around $15 trillion by 2028. Global healthcare spending would reach 10 trillion by 2022. So that's within a year and a half. And if we look at the World Bank just before COVID, in a report in 2019, the world's 54 poorest countries by 2030 would face a financing gap for essential health services of around $176 billion. So all of these statistics just bring to the forefront the importance of looking at the healthcare sector, and something which is quite significant, even though when we're talking about the well-being and health, we're talking about SDG number 3, but actually there are many other SDGs which are related to health. If we're talking about investments in sanitation, water, sewage, waste management, and here you touched on something very important early on. There is no government by itself that can meet what we call, if you will, the protection gap. And that's why it's very essential that private sector steps in as well, and also FDIs. And here we have a mutual responsibility in the sense that most corporates today have an agenda which is related to environment, the ESG agenda. So you have environment, you have governance, you have sustainability, and this can only happen if you have a focus on the well-being of citizens. And therefore, it is very important for governments to create a conducive environment for corporates to be able to employ their ESG agenda, because that goes hand in hand with the healthcare and this sector in particular. So it is really a dialogue which is quite important, where private investment can come in to meet very critical needs. And also, as you mentioned early on in your remarks, it's not just healthcare services, but all pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and so forth. If I go to the case of Egypt, we find that if we take a closer look, over the past 6 years, we have been focusing on investments in human capital through structural reforms related to the health sector to actually enhance its performance and increase accessibility to vulnerable groups. So for the first time, we established a universal health insurance system. This was in one governorate in July 2019, and now it's being scaled to, and this was in Port Said, now it's in Luxor and South Sinai. And the idea is to also integrate private sector providers into what the government system for healthcare includes. So this was a very important change when it comes to in creating a conducive environment for the private sector to come in, including also FDIs. Something else which is important is post-COVID or during COVID, the healthcare sector received higher allocations from the government. This was around $6 billion, and therefore an increase of 28% in spending, particularly in the most vulnerable governorates within the country. And something on cooperation, because this is also a platform for multilateralism and cooperation. We find that with our partners of development, IFC, World Bank, EBRD, there are many investments into private sector providers within the country, and this pushes the frontier and pushes the envelope for additional health services to be added. So we have different examples of investments in those cases. just recently, we also have a project with the World Bank, which will also allow for private sector involvement in the healthcare sector. So I believe that when we take a look at the topic which is on everyone's mind, how do we protect citizens, ourselves, the workforce that is supposed to be productive, and therefore the recovery of leaving no one behind. The idea is really through a multilateral system to ensure that our standards, the level playing field that is provided through policies within the government, are consistent with what we see internationally. And today, if I'm talking about Egypt in particular, there's so much that is happening, and also given the needs of the African continent, also there is a lot of, I would say, a positive spillover for FDI and private sector to be able to invest, whether it's in pharmaceuticals, whether it's in gear for doctors, and so forth. So these are it's a very opportune time for all of this. And as was mentioned, the financing gap is big, and therefore no government can do it on its own. It does have to include the private sector and FDI.